It began with a dream. A young chieftain in northwestern Anatolia, a man named Osman, saw in his sleep a moon rise from the chest of a holy man and settle into his own chest. From his body a tree grew. Its roots spread across 3 continents. Its branches covered the sky. 4 rivers flowed from its roots: the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, and the Danube. When he woke, he told the holy man Edebali what he had seen. Edebali interpreted it as prophecy. He gave Osman his daughter in marriage. He said, "Allah has given you and your descendants an empire." In 1299 CE, Osman I declared himself leader of a small principality in northwestern Anatolia. His territory was modest, his army was small. Around him were dozens of rival Turkish principalities competing for the same scraps of a collapsing Byzantine frontier. 623 years later, the Ottoman Empire ended. In between, it had conquered 3 continents. It had ended the Roman Empire. It had produced some of the greatest architectural masterpieces in human history. It had governed 25 million people at its peak. Its fleet had owned the Mediterranean. Its armies had stood before Vienna twice. Its caliphs had been protectors of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The tree in Osman's dream had grown exactly as he saw it. This is the story of the Ottoman Empire, the most powerful Islamic empire the world has ever seen. Part 1. The Foundation: From a Dream to an Empire. Osman I was born around 1258 CE, the son of Ertuğrul, a Turkic chieftain who had led his tribe west from Central Asia in the wake of the Mongol invasions that had shattered the Seljuk Sultanate. Ertuğrul had been given a small piece of land on the Byzantine frontier by the Seljuk Sultan as reward for his military service. It was not much, but it was on the edge of a crumbling empire. When Osman inherited leadership from his father around 1280 CE, he understood the opportunity that the frontier represented. The Byzantine Empire was weakening. It could no longer protect its Anatolian provinces effectively. Towns were vulnerable. Trade routes were unguarded. The empire that had once been the most powerful in the Mediterranean world was retreating, contracting, becoming something smaller than it had been. Osman expanded, not through grand battles, but through raids, alliances, marriages, and the slow, patient accumulation of territory that frontier chieftains excelled at. He absorbed rival Turkish groups. He recruited Byzantine renegades, including Christians who saw the Ottoman enterprise as more promising than the empire they were abandoning. His most important achievement came at the end of his life: the siege of Bursa. He laid siege to the major Byzantine city with 5,000 men. He cut off its supplies. He waited. After years of siege, Bursa fell in 1326 CE. Osman received the news on his deathbed. He had built the foundation. His son Orhan would build the walls. Orhan made Bursa the new Ottoman capital. He created the first Ottoman institutions, Islamic judges called qadis, to administer justice, a formal council of advisors, the beginnings of a structured military. He crossed into Europe in 1352, the first Ottoman soldiers on European soil. The dream was becoming architecture. In Part 2, the Janissaries, the army that made an empire. What made the Ottoman Empire different from every other medieval Islamic state was not just its territory or its sultans. It was its army. The Janissaries were the most disciplined and feared military force in the medieval world. They were created in the reign of Orhan and developed systematically by his successors. Young Christian boys from conquered lands taken from their families, converted to Islam, educated in Ottoman ways, trained from childhood in military discipline, and formed into an elite corps loyal exclusively to the Sultan. They had no family ties outside the corps. They had no land. They had no wealth except what the Sultan gave them. Their entire identity was the Ottoman military institution. They fought not for pay or land, but for Islam and for the Sultan. And because the institution they belonged to had been winning for generations. The Janissaries were also among the first regular infantry units in the world to make systematic use of firearms, adopting the arquebus in the 15th century, while most European armies still relied primarily on pikes and crossbows. The combination of disciplined formations, firearms, and extraordinary morale produced soldiers who had almost no equal in the medieval world. Around them, the Ottoman military system was one of the most sophisticated in history. Cavalry, artillery, siege engineers, naval forces, all integrated under a command structure that could project power simultaneously across multiple fronts. It was this army, built over a century from Orhan's modest beginnings, that Mehmed II took to Constantinople in 1453. Part 3. The Conquest of Constantinople, 1453, the day Rome ended. Constantine XI, Palaiologos, was the last emperor of the Romans. He knew Constantinople could not hold. He had approximately 7,000 defenders behind walls that had not been breached in 1,000 years. Mehmed II had 80,000 soldiers, perhaps more, and the largest cannons in the world. One cannon, built by the Hungarian engineer Urban, fired stone balls weighing over half a ton. The Byzantines had appealed to the West for help. The help did not come. The siege began in April 1453. The Urban cannon fired repeatedly into the ancient Theodosian walls. Walls that had stood since the 5th century CE. They began to crack. But the walls held long enough through repair and desperate resistance to exhaust Mehmed's patience. The Golden Horn, the harbor inside the city, was protected by a chain the Byzantines had stretched across the entrance. No Ottoman ship could sail in. Mehmed had the ships dragged overland. On a single night, his engineers built a greased wooden ramp over the Galata Hills and hauled 70 ships from the Bosporus into the Golden Horn. The Byzantines woke to find an Ottoman fleet inside their harbor. On May 29, 1453, the walls finally fell. Constantine XI died fighting in the last defense. His body was never conclusively identified. The Roman Empire, which had begun with Augustus Caesar in 27 BCE, ended that day. Mehmed II was 21 years old when he rode into Constantinople and went directly to the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom. He dismounted. He took a handful of earth and poured it over his head as a gesture of humility before Allah. He walked inside. He ordered it converted into a mosque. Then he made Constantinople his capital and renamed it the City of the World's Desire. Part 4. Suleiman the Magnificent, the peak of the world under Selim I, who conquered Egypt, Syria, and the Hejaz between 1512 and 1520. The Ottoman Sultan became the caliph of all Sunni Muslims and the custodian of the two holy mosques. The political and spiritual leadership of the Islamic world was unified in one throne. His son Suleiman made it magnificent. We have told Suleiman's story in full in a previous video. But in the context of the Ottoman Empire, Suleiman's reign from 1520 to 1566 represents the absolute peak of what the empire achieved. In those 46 years, Belgrade fell, Rhodes fell, Hungary was destroyed at Mohacs in 2 hours, the Ottoman fleet won the Mediterranean at Preveza, Baghdad was taken from Persia, and the empire stretched from Hungary to Iran, from Crimea to North Africa. 25 million subjects. The Suleimani Mosque rising over Istanbul. Built by Mimar Sinan, the greatest architect of the age. The Kanun, the unified legal code that made the empire function with a consistency and justice that astonished foreign observers. 3,000 poor people fed from the palace kitchen every day. The Austrian ambassador Busbek visited Istanbul during this period and wrote home to warn his emperor that the Ottomans were everything the Europeans were not: organized, disciplined, efficient, united, well-supplied. On the Ottoman side, everything. On the European side, empty treasuries, luxury habits, broken spirits, a raw and insubordinate soldiery. He was describing the gap between an empire at its peak and civilizations that had not yet found their footing. Part 5. The achievements that changed the world. The Ottoman Empire was not only war. In mathematics and astronomy, Ottoman scholars built on the foundations of Islamic Golden Age science. The astronomer Taqi ad-Din built an observatory in Istanbul in 1574 that was among the most advanced in the world. Ottoman mathematicians contributed to algebra and trigonometry. Ottoman geographers produced maps of the New World within decades of Columbus's voyages. In medicine, Ottoman hospitals called Darüşşifas were among the most advanced in the medieval world. The Edirne Darüşşifa, built in 1488, treated patients with music therapy, musicians playing specifically for the mentally ill. Centuries before Europe recognized mental illness as a medical condition. In architecture, Mimar Sinan alone built or supervised 374 structures. His greatest work, the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, used a dome wider than that of the Hagia Sophia and supported it with 8 pillars in a configuration that no architect before him had attempted. In governance, the millet system allowed Christians, Jews, Tin, and other religious minorities to govern their own internal affairs under their own laws. A degree of religious tolerance that was in practice more functional than what most European states managed in the same period. The Ottoman capital Istanbul was, for much of the empire's history, the largest and most cosmopolitan city in Europe and the Near East. It was a place where Greek and Armenian Christians, Sephardic Jews, expelled from Spain in 1492, Arab Muslims, Turkish Sufis, Persian scholars, and Balkan converts all lived under the same system of laws and shared the same markets. This was the city of the world's desire, and it earned the name. Part 6. The long decline empires do not fall in a day. They dissolve slowly, over generations. As the conditions that made them powerful change and the institutions that served them stop serving. After Suleiman, the sultans who followed were rarely his equals. The empire had grown so large that governing it required a bureaucracy of extraordinary sophistication. And bureaucracies, by nature, resist change. The Janissaries, who had been the empire's greatest military strength, became its most dangerous political faction. Capable of deposing sultans who threatened their privileges, the discovery of sea routes to Asia undermined Ottoman control of overland trade routes. The Silk Roads and Spice Roads that had enriched the empire for centuries. European navies that had been inferior to the Ottoman fleet in 1500 had surpassed it by 1700. The military revolution that gunpowder technology triggered in Europe happened while the Ottoman military system remained organized around the same principles it had used for generations. The empire tried to reform. The Tanzimat reforms of the 19th century attempted to modernize the state, secularize the law, and create a constitutional government. They were too slow, too contested, and too late. After defeat in World War I, the empire's territories were divided by the victorious European powers. The Sultanate was abolished in 1922. The Republic of Turkey was declared in 1923. The empire that had begun with one man's dream in a small principality in Anatolia, that had grown until its roots touched 3 continents, was gone. What the Ottoman Empire means: 623 years, 36 sultans, 3 continents. The end of one empire Rome, and the beginning of a civilization that shaped the Middle East, the Balkans, North Africa, and large parts of the Arab world in ways that are still felt today. The borders of modern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, all drawn substantially from the collapse of Ottoman provinces. The ethnic and religious composition of the Balkans, with its complex mixtures of Orthodox Christians, Sunni Muslims, and others, shaped by 6 centuries of Ottoman rule. The magnificent mosques, caravanserais, bridges, and hospitals that still stand from Istanbul to Cairo to Jerusalem, built by Ottoman architects and funded by Ottoman treasure. The Ottoman Empire was not perfect. No empire is. Its treatment of Armenians in the 20th century was a catastrophe of documented historical fact. Or its methods of maintaining power, fratricide at succession, the brutality of the Devshirme system, the violence of conquest, were features of an imperial system that caused genuine suffering. But it also fed millions, governed fairly under law, preserved and transmitted knowledge, built buildings of extraordinary beauty, and held together an extraordinarily diverse population for more than 6 centuries. Osman I dreamed of a tree whose branches covered the sky. He was not wrong. Subscribe to History Rise, because history this powerful deserves to be told.